The airport terminal hummed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, dragging suitcases behind them like reluctant pets, checking boarding passes with anxious expressions, and gulping down overpriced coffee as if it were liquid courage for the journey ahead. Among the crowd, Lieutenant Marcus Webb sat quietly in the boarding area for Flight 447 to Dallas, his army dress uniform crisp and immaculate despite the long day of travel that had brought him from his base in Germany to this connecting flight in Atlanta. The medals on his chest caught the fluorescent light occasionally, glinting like small promises of honor earned through sacrifice, through nights spent in places most Americans would never see, doing things most Americans would never have to do. Marcus had been deployed for 18 months and he was finally going home to see his mother, who had been sick, and his daughter, who had grown from a little girl into a young woman in his absence, sending him videos of her high school graduation that he had watched on a tablet screen thousands of miles away, wiping tears from his eyes in the privacy of his bunk while his fellow soldiers pretended not to notice. He held his boarding pass in his hand, seat 3A, first class, an upgrade he had received through a military courtesy program that airlines sometimes offered to service members traveling in uniform. Marcus hadn't asked for it, hadn't expected it, but when the gate agent had smiled at him and handed him the new boarding pass with a quiet "thank you for your service," he had felt a small warmth in his chest, a recognition that what he did mattered, that the uniform meant something to someone beyond the walls of the military itself. He had nodded, said thank you, and made his way to the boarding area, where he now sat with his small carry-on bag at his feet, watching families reunite and businesspeople tap impatiently at their phones, living in a world that felt both familiar and strangely distant after so many months away from American soil. Across the waiting area, another man prepared to board the same flight, though his preparation looked nothing like Marcus's quiet patience. Donovan Reichard moved through the terminal like a man who owned not just the space he occupied but the very air around him, his custom-tailored suit probably costing more than most people's monthly rent, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the tile floor with the confident rhythm of someone who had never been told no, never been denied, never been made to wait for anything in his entire privileged life. Donovan was the kind of wealthy that didn't just open doors but removed them entirely, the kind of man who measured his worth by the number of zeros in his bank account and the number of people he could make jump when he snapped his fingers. He ran a hedge fund that had made him obscenely rich during economic downturns that had devastated ordinary families, and he wore his wealth like armor, like proof of his superiority, like evidence that he was simply better than everyone else in every way that mattered. He approached the gate with his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at someone on the other end about a deal that needed to close by Monday, about numbers that needed to move, about people who needed to make things happen or find themselves unemployed. His boarding pass showed seat 5C, first class but not the front row, and this irritated him in a way that seemed disproportionate to any reasonable person but felt entirely justified to Donovan, who believed that his status in the world should be reflected in every aspect of his existence, including and especially where he sat on an airplane. He had tried to get the gate agent to change his seat, had offered to pay extra, had mentioned his frequent flyer status with the kind of emphasis that suggested it should open doors to heavenly realms, but the flight was full, the agent had explained with professional politeness, and there were no other first-class seats available for reassignment. When boarding began, Marcus stood with the other first-class passengers, moving forward with the same disciplined patience he brought to everything, a patience learned through years of military service, through waiting for orders, through understanding that sometimes you moved when told to move and stood still when told to stand still, and that complaining about it changed nothing except your own character for the worse. He made his way down the jet bridge and onto the aircraft, nodding politely to the flight attendants who greeted passengers at the door, their smiles professional but somehow warmer when they saw his uniform, saw the evidence of service, saw the silent story written in ribbons and medals across his chest. He found his seat, 3A, a window seat in the first row, and began to stow his carry-on in the overhead compartment with practiced efficiency, the movements economical and precise, everything done with the minimum necessary motion to achieve maximum effect. Donovan boarded minutes later, still on his phone, still talking about millions of dollars as if they were loose change, still radiating the kind of entitlement that made flight attendants grip their smiles a little tighter and other passengers instinctively step aside. He moved through first class toward his assigned seat, but as he passed row 3 he stopped, his eyes landing on Marcus settling into 3A, and something shifted in his expression, something ugly and ancient, something that belonged in a different century but had somehow survived and thrived in the shadows of a society that claimed to have moved beyond such things. He looked at Marcus, at the black man in the military uniform sitting in the front row of first class, and his face twisted with an indignation that seemed to come from someplace deep and rotten inside him, someplace where prejudice lived like a parasite feeding on his sense of superiority. "Excuse me," Donovan said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby passengers who were still settling in, still arranging their belongings, still existing in the innocent assumption that this would be an ordinary flight. "I think there's been some kind of mistake here. That's my seat." Marcus looked up, confusion crossing his face, the kind of confusion that comes from being confronted with something so unexpected that your brain needs a moment to process that it's actually happening. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice calm, trained to remain level even in stressful situations, even when chaos erupted around him, even when people were shooting at him, so certainly he could remain calm when someone was simply confused about a seat assignment. "This is 3A. My boarding pass says 3A. He held up the pass, showing it clearly, the printed letters and numbers right there in black and white, undeniable, factual, true. Donovan barely glanced at it, waving his hand dismissively as if facts were optional, as if reality itself could be negotiated like a business deal, as if the truth was whatever he decided it should be in any given moment. "I always sit in the front row," he said, his tone suggesting this was not just a preference but a law of nature, something written into the fabric of the universe itself. "I'm a platinum frequent flyer. I shouldn't even be back in 5C. There's obviously been some error with the system, and I need you to move back to another seat so this can be corrected." The flight attendant, a woman named Patricia who had been working for the airline for 23 years and had seen just about everything humanity had to offer in the confined space of an aircraft cabin, approached with her professional smile starting to show strain around the edges. "Sir," she said to Donovan, her voice embodying the kind of patience that comes from years of dealing with difficult passengers, "this gentleman is in his assigned seat. Your boarding pass shows 5C, which is available for you just a few rows back. If you'd like, I can help you get settled there." Donovan turned to her with an expression that made clear exactly what he thought of her suggestion, her help, and quite possibly her existence as a human being with thoughts and feelings. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, and Patricia felt her heart sink because she did know, she knew exactly what kind of person asked that question, what kind of person thought their identity was a weapon to be wielded against service workers and anyone else they deemed beneath them. "I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline every year. I have status that should mean something. And I'm certainly not sitting behind." He paused, his eyes sliding back to Marcus with undisguised contempt, with a look that managed to convey volumes of ugliness without finishing the sentence, though everyone within earshot understood exactly what he was implying, exactly what category he was putting Marcus into, exactly what this was really about. Marcus felt something cold settle into his stomach, the familiar, sickening recognition of hatred, the particular brand of disrespect that he had encountered throughout his life despite every achievement, every sacrifice, every time he had put on the uniform and sworn to defend the very people who looked at him like he was less than human. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, had led men through situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between everyone coming home or someone's family getting a folded flag, had earned every ribbon and medal on his chest through blood and sweat and fear swallowed down and duty performed when it would have been so much easier to quit, to hide, to let someone else do the hard things. And now he sat here on a civilian aircraft, in a seat he had been assigned legitimately, being told by a man who had probably never sacrificed anything more significant than a lunch reservation that he needed to move, and they both knew it had nothing to do with frequent flyer status or seat preferences and everything to do with the color of his skin. "Sir," Patricia said to Donovan, her voice hardening slightly, her professional facade beginning to crack because she too understood what was happening here, what poison was being spilled in her cabin, what hatred was being served up like it was somehow acceptable behavior. "This passenger is seated correctly according to his boarding pass. He's a member of our armed forces traveling on a military courtesy upgrade, and he is absolutely entitled to be in that seat. Your assigned seat is 5C, and I need you to proceed there so we can prepare for departure." Donovan's face flushed red, anger and indignation warring for dominance in his expression. And when he spoke again his voice had risen to a level that made every passenger in first class stop what they were doing and watch, made people crane their necks to see what was causing the commotion, made the entire front section of the aircraft go silent with the awkward tension of witnessing something that shouldn't be happening but was. "Military courtesy?" he said, loading the words with such scorn that they became weapons. "So now we're just handing out first-class seats to anyone in a uniform? This is absurd. I paid for my ticket. I earned my status through actual business, through contributing to the economy, through being successful. I shouldn't have to sit behind someone who's just getting a free handout because he put on a costume." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, toxic and spreading, and Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily, felt every muscle in his body tighten with the effort of remaining calm, of not responding to the provocation the way every angry, hurt part of him wanted to respond, of remembering that he wore the uniform and the uniform meant something, meant discipline, meant being better than the worst provocations people threw at you, meant holding yourself to a higher standard even when others held you to impossible and contradictory standards designed to ensure your failure. He took a slow breath, the kind of breath you take before entering a dangerous building or confronting an armed enemy, centering yourself, reminding yourself of who you are and what you stand for when the world seems determined to strip away your humanity and reduce you to nothing but the color of your skin. "This isn't a costume," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume, carrying with the weight of absolute truth spoken by someone who had earned every right to speak it. "This is a uniform I've worn in places you couldn't imagine, doing things you couldn't do, protecting freedoms you take for granted while disrespecting the people who guarantee them. I was assigned this seat. I'm staying in this seat. And I'm asking you man to man, to please move to your assigned seat and let everyone else on this flight have a peaceful journey home. If you're watching this and feeling the weight of this moment, if you're understanding the profound disrespect being shown to someone who served their country with honor, I want you to know that stories like this matter, that sharing them matters, that recognizing these moments of injustice and the responses to them matters. If this story is touching something in you, hitting something deep that needs to be acknowledged, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you'll know when new stories come out, stories that dig into the complex, painful, beautiful reality of human nature and the choices we make. And listen, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, your thoughts, your own experiences, the moments when you've witnessed dignity in the face of disrespect, or times when you've had to stand up for what's right when it would have been easier to stay silent. Your voice matters. Your story matters. So please subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's build a community that shares these important truths together. Donovan's face had gone from red to something approaching purple, and he opened his mouth to launch into what was clearly going to be an even more venomous response. But Patricia held up her hand with a firmness that surprised everyone, including possibly herself. "Sir," she said, and this time there was no customer service sweetness in her voice, no pretense of endless patience, just the hard edge of someone who had reached their absolute limit. "I need you to take your assigned seat immediately, or I will have to call the captain and we will address this situation with the appropriate authorities. This passenger has done nothing wrong. He is seated correctly. Your behavior is disrupting the boarding process and causing distress to other passengers. Please proceed to 5C now." For a moment, it seemed like Donovan might actually comply, might actually back down from the confrontation and slink back to his assigned seat with whatever dignity he could salvage from the situation, but then he made what would turn out to be the worst decision of his day, possibly of his year, potentially of a lifetime of bad decisions built on the foundation of believing his money made him untouchable. He reached out and grabbed Marcus's arm, actually put his hands on him, actually committed the physical act of trying to forcibly remove him from the seat. And in that moment everything changed. The confrontation transformed from words into actions, from ugly speech into actual assault, and the entire cabin seemed to gasp collectively, shocked into silence by the audacity, by the violence, by the sheer unbelievable nerve of what they were witnessing. Marcus reacted on instinct, the kind of instinct that comes from military training and combat experience, the kind of reflexes that keep you alive when someone means you harm. He stood up in one fluid motion, breaking Donovan's grip with a practiced movement that was controlled and precise, defending himself without retaliating, removing the threat without escalating to violence, every motion speaking to discipline and training and restraint that most civilians would never understand or appreciate. He stood at his full height, and Donovan suddenly seemed to realize that he had just put his hands on a man who was not only taller and more physically capable than him but who had been trained to handle threats far more dangerous than an overprivileged businessman having a tantrum at 30,000 feet, or in this case still sitting on the tarmac. "Do not touch me," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a register that made it clear this was not a request but a boundary being drawn in stone, a line that absolutely would not be crossed again without serious consequences. Do not ever put your hands on me or anyone else on this aircraft. I have been nothing but respectful. I have followed every rule. I have done everything right. And you have been nothing but disrespectful, entitled, and honestly, sir, your behavior has been racist and completely unacceptable. The word hung in the air like a verdict, like an accusation that couldn't be taken back, like the truth spoken out loud when everyone else had been dancing around it, pretending they didn't see it, pretending this was about seat assignments and airline policies when it had always been about something much darker and older and more poisonous. Other passengers began to react, some pulling out phones to record what was happening, others murmuring to their seatmates, a few calling out their support for Marcus, telling him he was right, telling Donovan to sit down and shut up, the collective conscience of the crowd finally finding its voice after watching in stunned silence. Patricia grabbed the phone handset from the bulkhead and pressed a button, speaking quickly and urgently to someone, and within moments a man in a captain's uniform emerged from the cockpit, his presence immediately commanding attention, immediately shifting the entire energy of the situation because now the ultimate authority on the aircraft had arrived. Now the person who could make decisions that no one else could question or overrule was standing in the aisle of first class, taking in the scene with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. Captain Raymond Foster had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years, had dealt with medical emergencies, mechanical failures, severe weather, and more passenger conflicts than he could count. But something about this situation, something about seeing a soldier in uniform being harassed and physically grabbed by someone who thought money entitled them to commit assault, something about the whole ugly display made his jaw tighten in a way that his co-pilot would later describe as dangerous calm. He looked at Marcus, still standing, still composed despite everything, despite the rage that must have been burning inside him, despite the humiliation, despite the injustice of being treated this way in the country he had sworn to defend. He looked at Donovan, still red-faced and indignant, still apparently convinced that he was the victim in this situation, still radiating entitlement like a noxious gas. And he looked at Patricia, who gave him a quick, efficient summary of everything that had transpired, every word of disrespect, every refusal to comply, every escalation culminating in the physical assault. Captain Foster nodded slowly, processing everything, making calculations and decisions with the kind of swift certainty that comes from decades of experience making choices in situations where hesitation can be fatal, where leadership means acting decisively even when the action might be unpopular, even when it might cost something, even when it would be easier to make peace and move on and pretend like everything was fine when it absolutely was not. He turned to Donovan with an expression that made several passengers later report feeling cold despite the cabin being perfectly climate-controlled. "Sir," Captain Foster said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes people instinctively stand straighter, the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument or negotiation or appeal. "I am the captain of this aircraft, which means I have absolute authority over everything that happens on it from the moment passengers board until the moment they deplane. I have been informed that you have refused to take your assigned seat, that you have been verbally abusive and disrespectful to both this passenger and my crew, that you have made statements that could reasonably be interpreted as racist in nature, and most seriously, that you have committed what constitutes assault by putting your hands on another passenger in an aggressive manner. Any one of these things would be sufficient grounds for me to have you removed from this aircraft. All of them together make it not just my right but my responsibility." Donovan's mouth fell open, shock replacing indignation on his face like weather changing, like the sudden realization that the world was not going to bend to his will this time, that his money and status were not going to save him, that he had finally crossed the line with someone who had both the authority and the moral conviction to hold him accountable. "You can't be serious," he said, but the words came out weak, without conviction, the sound of a man who was beginning to understand that yes, they could be and were absolutely serious. "Do you know how much I spend with this airline? Do you know what kind of trouble you're going to be in for this?" Captain Foster smiled, but it was not a warm smile, not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes or indicates any humor or friendliness. It was the smile of someone who has heard threats before and remained completely unmoved by them, the smile of someone who knows exactly where they stand and what they're willing to sacrifice to stand there. "Sir, I know exactly what I'm doing and I know exactly what authority I have to do it. And frankly, I don't care if you spend $10 million a year with this airline or 10 cents. What I care about is safety, respect, and ensuring that every passenger on my aircraft is treated with dignity regardless of their race, their economic status, or any other factor. You have violated those principles repeatedly and egregiously. This flight is not departing with you on it." He turned to Patricia and another flight attendant who had joined them, drawn by the commotion, witnesses to the confrontation. "Please escort this passenger off the aircraft and notify gate security that he is not to be permitted to board. Contact the operations center and have them note in his file that he has been removed due to assaultive behavior and discriminatory harassment. If he refuses to deplane voluntarily, notify airport police that we need law enforcement assistance with a disruptive passenger." The captain's words fell like hammers, each sentence another nail in the coffin of Donovan's attempt to use his privilege as a shield against consequences. Each directive a clear statement that this was not negotiable, not subject to debate, not something that could be argued or bargained away. Flight attendants moved into position, their body language making clear that this was happening whether Donovan cooperated or not, whether he went quietly or had to be dragged off by police, whether he maintained what little dignity he had left or lost, even that in a final desperate attempt to assert dominance he no longer possessed. "This is discrimination," Donovan sputtered, his face now approaching a shade of red that might have been medically concerning. "You're discriminating against me because I'm successful, because I spoke up, because I wouldn't back down to your politically correct nonsense." Captain Foster actually laughed at that, a short bark of sound that contained more contempt than most people could convey in an entire paragraph of insults. "Sir, you just physically assaulted a decorated soldier and called his uniform a costume, implied he didn't deserve to sit in first class because of the color of his skin, and disrupted the boarding of my aircraft to the point where we are now significantly behind schedule. If you think refusing to tolerate that behavior constitutes discrimination against you, then I genuinely do not know what to tell you except that you need to re-evaluate your entire understanding of how the world works and how people should be treated. Now you can walk off this aircraft under your own power with whatever dignity you have left, or I can have airport police escort you off. Your choice. You have 30 seconds to decide." The cabin had gone completely silent, every passenger watching the drama unfold with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for movie climaxes, every eye on Donovan as he stood there processing the fact that he had lost, that his money and status had not saved him, that he was being held accountable in front of everyone, publicly humiliated in exactly the way he had tried to humiliate Marcus, karma arriving with swift and undeniable force. He looked around as if searching for support, for someone who would validate his perspective, defend his actions, tell the captain he was wrong, but he found only hostile stares, disgusted expressions, people actively turning away from him as if his presence was contaminating, as if association with him might somehow taint them by proximity. Finally, with no options left and no allies to be found, Donovan grabbed his carry-on from the overhead bin with jerky, angry movements and stormed toward the exit, but not before turning back one last time to Marcus and spitting out, "This isn't over. I'll make sure everyone knows how I was treated, how they chose some random soldier over a valued customer, how this airline cares more about appearances than about the people who actually fund their operations." Marcus looked at him with an expression that somehow managed to convey both pity and steel, both sadness that someone could be so consumed by hatred and privilege, and absolute certainty that he had nothing to apologize for, nothing to regret, nothing to back down from. "I hope you do tell people," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cabin. "I hope you tell everyone exactly what happened here, how you tried to take a seat from someone because you didn't think they deserved it, how you put your hands on someone when they didn't obey you, how you showed disrespect to someone who served their country while you served only yourself. Please tell everyone that story and let them draw their own conclusions about who was in the wrong." Donovan made a sound like a wounded animal and practically ran off the aircraft, followed by Patricia and another crew member, leaving behind a cabin full of passengers who immediately erupted into applause, into cheers, into verbal affirmations of support for Marcus, for the captain, for justice being served right there in real time in a way that felt almost miraculous in its clarity and decisiveness. People called out, "Thank you for your service, and you handled that with such class," and "I can't believe someone would act that way," and Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming emotion of being seen, of being supported, of having people stand up for him when he had prepared himself for the opposite, had steeled himself for the likely reality that the rich white businessman would win and he would be the one asked to move, to accommodate. to make himself smaller to fit into a world that had never quite made room for him. Captain Foster approached Marcus and extended his hand, which Marcus shook, feeling the firm grip of someone who meant what they said and backed it up with actions, someone whose word actually meant something because they had proved it in the moment of truth. "Lieutenant Webb," the captain said, having heard his name from the boarding pass, "I apologize that you had to experience that on one of my flights. That was unacceptable behavior, and you handled it with more grace than it deserved. Thank you for your service to our country, and please know that you are welcome in that seat in this first-class cabin on this airline and anywhere else you choose to be. You've earned every privilege and more through your sacrifice." If this story is resonating with you, if you're feeling the injustice of what Marcus faced and the rightness of how it was resolved, I want to invite you again to engage with this community we're building. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about times you've witnessed discrimination or stood up against it. Let us know what other stories you'd like to hear that explore these painful but necessary topics. Subscribe if you haven't already, turn on those notifications so you don't miss future stories, and please consider sharing this video with people in your life who need to hear these messages about dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right even when it costs something. We need more people willing to be like Captain Foster, willing to use whatever authority or privilege they have to defend those who are being treated unjustly. So subscribe, comment, share, and let's keep this conversation going because it matters, it really truly matters. Marcus took his seat again, this time with the supportive looks of everyone around him, with passengers giving him thumbs up and nods of respect, with flight attendants stopping by to offer him water or coffee or anything he needed, with the warm embrace of community that had formed in opposition to the hatred they had witnessed. The flight departed 20 minutes late, but Captain Foster made an announcement explaining that they had dealt with a disruptive passenger situation and apologizing for the delay, and not a single person complained, everyone understanding that some things were more important than being on time, that standing up against racism and assault was worth every minute of delay and then some. During the flight, several passengers came up to Marcus to thank him personally, to tell him about family members who had served, to express admiration for how he had handled the situation, to apologize on behalf of humanity for having to deal with someone like Donovan. An older white man with a Vietnam veteran hat approached him with tears in his eyes and said, "Brother, I saw things like that happen to soldiers like you back in my day, and I'm ashamed I didn't always stand up the way I should have. Seeing you handle that with such dignity, seeing that captain do the right thing, it gives me hope that maybe we're finally getting somewhere as a country. Thank you for serving and thank you for showing us all what real strength looks like." A young black woman traveling with her daughter stopped by his seat and knelt down to speak to him at eye level, her daughter watching with wide, attentive eyes. "My daughter asked me what that man was so angry about back there before we took off," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I told her the truth, that some people still judge others by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character, but that there are also good people like that pilot who stand up for what's right. I wanted her to see a black man in uniform who served our country with honor, who faced disrespect with dignity, who showed her what it means to take the high road even when people try to drag you down. Thank you for being that example for her and for all of us." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, by the humanity of people who had been strangers minutes ago but who now felt like allies, like witnesses to something important, like participants in a moment that transcended the ordinary boundaries of airline travel and touched something deeper about what kind of society they wanted to live in, what values they wanted to uphold, what lines they were willing to draw and defend. He spoke with people throughout the flight, sharing stories from his deployment, listening to their stories, finding connection in the shared experience of witnessing injustice and seeing it confronted with moral courage. When the plane landed in Dallas, Captain Foster made another announcement, his voice carrying through the cabin with warmth and conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we arrive at the gate, I want to take a moment to address what happened during boarding. We had to remove a passenger today due to behavior that violated both our policies and basic standards of human decency. I want you all to know that this airline, this crew, and I personally have zero tolerance for discrimination, harassment, or assault of any kind. We will always prioritize the safety, dignity, and respect of every passenger regardless of race, religion, economic status, or any other factor." To Lieutenant Marcus Webb, traveling with us today in Seat 3A, thank you for your service, thank you for your patience with a difficult situation, and welcome home. And to all of you who supported him and supported our decision to maintain standards of decency on this aircraft, Thank you for being the kind of passengers and the kind of people that give me hope for our future." The cabin erupted in applause again, and Marcus wiped tears from his eyes openly now, no longer trying to hide the emotion, no longer maintaining the stoic military bearing, just allowing himself to feel the fullness of being seen and valued and defended by strangers who had chosen, in a moment of testing, to stand on the side of justice. When the plane reached the gate and passengers began to deplane, many of them stopped to shake his hand, to thank him again, to wish him well, to tell him they'd never forget what they witnessed today. Marcus was one of the last to leave the aircraft, and as he passed through the galley area, Captain Foster was there waiting, along with Patricia and the rest of the crew. The captain handed him a small card with his personal email address written on it. "If that man or anyone else causes you any trouble, if there are any repercussions from today that you need help with, you contact me directly," he said firmly. "I meant what I said about zero tolerance, and that extends to protecting you from any retaliation or ongoing harassment. I've already filed a complete report with the airline, with airport security, and with the FAA. That man's behavior is documented, and he's going to face consequences beyond just missing this flight." Patricia stepped forward and gave Marcus a hug, something that probably violated some policy about crew member boundaries with passengers, but neither of them cared, both of them recognizing that some moments transcended policies, some connections between humans required physical expression of solidarity and support. "You are a class act," she told him, her voice wavering with emotion. "I've been doing this job for over 2 decades, and I've seen way too many situations where the wrong person won, where money and privilege carried the day, where people like you got pushed aside to keep wealthy passengers happy. Today was different. Today was right. And I'll never forget it." As Marcus walked through the terminal toward baggage claim, he noticed that several passengers from his flight had waited, had formed a kind of honor guard along his path, applauding as he passed, a spontaneous demonstration of respect and solidarity that made him stop in his tracks, overwhelmed by the beauty of humanity in its best moments, by the capacity of strangers to recognize injustice and reject it, to see another human being treated poorly and refuse to be complicit in that treatment, through silence or indifference. His mother was waiting at baggage claim, and when she saw him, when she saw the tears on his face and the emotion in his expression, she knew immediately that something significant had happened. He folded her into his arms and held her tight, this woman who had raised him to be strong and proud and dignified, who had taught him that his worth was not determined by how others saw him but by how he carried himself, who had sent her son off to war 3 times and gotten him back each time, who had earned every gray hair worrying about him and every smile celebrating his safe returns. "Tell me what happened, baby," she said, and he did, standing right there in the baggage claim area while his daughter arrived minutes later and joined them, while he recounted the entire story of being disrespected and defended, of facing hatred and receiving support, of seeing moral courage in action when it would have been so much easier for that captain to try to smooth things over, to ask him to move just to keep the peace, to prioritize the comfort of a wealthy passenger over the dignity of a soldier. His daughter listened with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, and when he finished she said, "Dad, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I'm so proud of how you handled it, and I'm so grateful there are people like that pilot who stood up for you." In the days that followed, the story spread in ways Marcus never anticipated. Several passengers had indeed recorded portions of the confrontation, and the videos went viral on social media, sparking conversations about racism, about respect for military service, about the responsibilities of people in positions of authority, about what it means to be a bystander versus an ally. The airline issued a public statement praising Captain Foster's actions and reaffirming their commitment to inclusive, respectful treatment of all passengers. Donovan Reichert found himself on the receiving end of public condemnation, his business suffering as clients questioned whether they wanted to be associated with someone whose true character had been so publicly revealed, his reputation taking hits that all his money couldn't cushion or repair, the consequences of his actions spreading through his life like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Marcus received hundreds of messages from people around the country, from fellow veterans who had experienced similar treatment, from civilians who thanked him for his service and his dignity, from young black men and women who said seeing him stand his ground had given them courage to stand their ground in their own lives, to refuse to accept disrespect, to believe they were worthy of dignity and space and recognition no matter what anyone else said or did. He was interviewed by several news outlets, always humble in his responses, always emphasizing that he wasn't special, that every service member deserved respect, that the real hero of the story was Captain Foster, who had used his authority to do what was right even though it would have been easier and probably better for his career to just smooth things over and move on. Captain Foster faced no negative repercussions for his decision. In fact, the airline promoted him to a training position where he would help develop policies and procedures for handling discrimination and passenger conflicts, recognizing that his moral clarity and decisive action were exactly the kind of leadership they needed to cultivate throughout their organization. He and Marcus stayed in touch, exchanging emails periodically, forming an unlikely friendship built on shared values and mutual respect, on the recognition that they had both been tested in that moment and had both chosen correctly, had both decided that principles mattered more than convenience, that human dignity was worth defending even when it cost something, even when it might have been easier to look the other way. Several months after the incident, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a military appreciation event hosted by the airline, where they wanted him to share his story as part of their renewed commitment to honoring service members and creating an environment of true respect and inclusion. He accepted, despite his natural inclination toward privacy, because he understood that his story had become bigger than just his personal experience, that it represented something important about the ongoing struggle against racism, about the dignity that every human being deserved regardless of their skin color or economic status, about the power of people in authority to either perpetuate injustice or stand against it. On the day of the event, Marcus stood before an audience of airline executives, crew members, veterans, and community leaders, and he told his story again, but this time with the perspective of someone who had processed the experience, who had received thousands of messages from people whose lives had been touched by what happened, who understood now the full weight of that moment on the aircraft and what it meant to so many people who had never been defended, never been valued, never been told that they mattered as much as someone with more money or lighter skin. He spoke about the loneliness of serving your country while knowing that segments of that country still saw you as less than, still treated you as suspicious or threatening or undeserving. He spoke about the quiet erosion of dignity that happens when you face small acts of discrimination and disrespect day after day, year after year, until you start to wonder if maybe the problem really is you, if maybe you're being too sensitive, if maybe you should just accept being treated as less than because that's the price of existing in spaces where people like you aren't supposed to be. And then he spoke about what it meant when Captain Foster stepped into that aisle and made a different choice, when someone with power and authority used it to defend rather than to oppress, when the system that so often fails people who look like him actually worked the way it was supposed to work, delivering justice instead of injustice, standing up for dignity instead of privilege. He talked about how that single act of moral courage had rippled outward, how passengers on that flight had been changed by witnessing it, how people who saw the videos online had been inspired to examine their own responses to injustice, how even small moments of standing up for what's right can create waves of change that extend far beyond the immediate situation. I don't tell this story to make anyone feel guilty or to claim some special victim status, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the conference room, every eye focused on him with attention that felt almost sacred in its intensity. I tell it because it's true, because it happened, because it keeps happening to people every single day in different forms and different contexts, and because we need to talk about it honestly if we're ever going to change it. But I also tell it because of what happened after the injustice, because Captain Foster showed us what leadership looks like when it's aligned with moral courage, when it's willing to make the hard choice even at personal cost, when it refuses to compromise on basic human dignity for the sake of convenience or profit or keeping wealthy customers happy. He paused, looking out at the audience, seeing tears on some faces, seeing nodding heads, seeing people leaning forward as if physically drawn toward his words. That captain could have asked me to move. It would have been easier. It would have resolved the situation quickly. It would have kept a high-value customer from being angry. But it would have been wrong. It would have rewarded hatred and entitlement. It would have sent a message to everyone on that aircraft that money matters more than morality, that skin color determines your worth, that service to your country means nothing if you don't also have wealth and privilege to back it up. Instead, he made a different choice. He chose correctly. And in doing so, he didn't just defend me. He defended every passenger on that flight who would have been diminished by witnessing injustice without consequence. He defended the standards of decency that make civilization possible. He defended the idea that we can be better than our worst impulses, that we can create spaces where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve simply by virtue of being human. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, and Marcus stood there accepting it not for himself but for every service member who had faced similar disrespect, for every black person who had been made to feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy, for every time someone had stood up for justice when it would have been easier to stay seated, for every victory of decency over hatred no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Captain Foster was there in the audience, and Marcus called him up to the stage, insisting that he be recognized because the real story wasn't about Marcus enduring discrimination but about Foster refusing to tolerate it, about authority being used correctly for once, about power being exercised in service of justice rather than convenience. The two men stood together on that stage, one black and one white, one a soldier and one a pilot, both of them representing something essential about what it meant to do the right thing even when the wrong thing would have been easier, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room or anyone who would later see photos from the event. They shook hands, and then Foster pulled Marcus into an embrace that felt like a promise, like a commitment that there were people who would stand up, who would use whatever authority or influence they had to create a more just world, who would refuse to be complicit in hatred or discrimination or the casual cruelty that privileged people so often inflicted on those they deemed beneath them. In the months and years that followed, Marcus's story became part of training programs not just for that airline but for others as well, a case study in how to handle passenger conflicts involving discrimination, a teaching tool for what moral leadership looked like in practice rather than just in theory. Captain Foster's decisive action became a model for other crew members, a permission structure that said it was not just acceptable but necessary to remove passengers who engaged in racist harassment or assault, that no amount of money spent with the company justified tolerating behavior that made the cabin unsafe or hostile for other travelers, that there were lines that couldn't be crossed without consequences no matter who you were or how much you paid. The incident also sparked broader conversations within the military community about the treatment of service members, particularly service members of color, who often found themselves in situations where their sacrifice and service were verbally honored in abstract terms but disrespected in concrete moments of interaction. Veterans groups began speaking more openly about the unique challenges faced by black soldiers who fought for a country that still treated them as second-class citizens in many contexts, who wore uniforms that were supposed to command respect but found that respect was conditional, dependent on the prejudices and preferences of whoever they encountered. These conversations were painful, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about persistent racism and the gap between American ideals and American realities, but they were also necessary, the kind of honest dialogue that had to happen if anything was ever going to actually change. Marcus continued his military career, eventually retiring with full honors after 23 years of service, after rising to the rank of colonel, after mentoring countless young soldiers and leading with the same dignity and integrity that had characterized his response to being disrespected on that flight. At his retirement ceremony, he spoke about the importance of maintaining your values even when the world seemed determined to make you compromise them, about standing firm in your sense of self-worth even when others tried to diminish it, about the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform not just to defend the country in military terms but to embody its highest ideals in every interaction, every choice, every moment of testing. His daughter, now a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases, often cited her father's story when talking to clients who had experienced discrimination, using it as an example of how dignity in the face of disrespect could be its own form of resistance, how maintaining composure and moral clarity could be more powerful than responding to hatred with hatred. She had been shaped by watching her father handle that incident with grace, by seeing him refuse to be diminished by someone else's prejudice, by learning that strength sometimes looked like restraint, that power sometimes manifested as patience, that victory sometimes meant holding your ground while others revealed their true character through their treatment of you. The story of what happened on Flight 447 became one of those moments that people referenced when they talked about racism and accountability, about the importance of bystanders becoming allies, about what it meant to use privilege and authority for good rather than perpetuating harm. It wasn't a story with a perfect happy ending where racism was defeated and everyone learned their lesson and the world was fixed. Donovan Reichard probably didn't become a better person. People rarely do after being publicly humiliated, and men who build their identities on wealth and superiority rarely surrender those foundations just because they face consequences once. Racism didn't end because one captain made one good decision on one flight on one day. But something did change, even if it was smaller and quieter than ending racism altogether. People who watched that video or heard that story found themselves thinking differently about their own choices, about times they had witnessed discrimination and stayed silent, about opportunities they might have in the future to stand up for someone being treated unjustly. Crew members at airlines around the country felt emboldened to enforce standards of conduct more strictly, to not tolerate abusive behavior from wealthy passengers, to prioritize the safety and dignity of all travelers over the comfort of a privileged few. Soldiers traveling in uniform reported feeling more respected, more valued, more likely to have people thank them sincerely rather than just mouth-empty platitudes about supporting the troops while treating them with casual disrespect. And Marcus Webb got to go home that day knowing that he hadn't backed down, hadn't accepted being treated as less than, hadn't allowed someone's hatred and entitlement to make him question his own worth or his right to occupy space in the world. He got to show his daughter what it looked like to stand up for yourself with dignity, got to demonstrate that you could face injustice without becoming bitter or broken, got to prove that there were still people who would stand up for what was right even when it cost them something. That mattered. That meant something. That changed something, even if only in the hearts and minds of the people who witnessed it and carried the memory forward into their own lives and choices. Years later, Marcus would occasionally receive messages from people who had been on that flight, who wanted him to know they still thought about what happened, that it had changed how they saw the world and their responsibility in it, that they had stood up in situations where they might have previously stayed silent because they remembered watching Captain Foster stand up for him. A woman wrote to tell him that she had reported a colleague for making racist comments at work, something she had never had the courage to do before, but the memory of strangers applauding his dignity had given her strength to speak up. A man wrote to say he had left his job at a company with discriminatory practices because he realized he couldn't be complicit in creating environments where people like Marcus would be treated poorly, and that his conscience wouldn't allow him to prioritize his paycheck over his values anymore. These were small things in the grand scheme of a world still struggling with racism, inequality, injustice, and all the ways humans find to be cruel to each other. But they were also everything because change happens through accumulation of small choices, through individuals deciding in moment after moment to do better, to be better, to stand up rather than stay seated, to speak up rather than stay silent, to use whatever power or privilege or authority they have to make the world a little more just, a little more kind, a little more aligned with the values they claim to hold. Listen, if you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, if you felt the weight of what Marcus endured and the power of how people responded, then I want to thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about these stories that illuminate both the worst and best of human nature. This is exactly why this channel exists, to share these moments that matter, these stories that reveal truth about who we are and who we can choose to be. If this story touched you, moved you, made you think differently about standing up for justice, then please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with people in your life who need to hear it. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, your own experiences with discrimination or with witnessing moral courage, your ideas for other stories you want to hear. This community we're building together, these conversations we're having, they matter more than you might realize. Every subscription, every share, every comment contributes to keeping these important stories alive and spreading them to people who need to hear them. So subscribe, turn on notifications, comment, share, and let's keep fighting for a world where dignity and respect aren't privileges but rights that everyone receives simply because they're human. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring enough to be part of this community working towards something better.